Last month, I tried something new. I ordered my estrogen on the internet. Took a little bit of research, but I found a supplier. I paid them some small fraction of a Bitcoin, and a week later, a little package showed up at my doorstep. I do have a prescription for estrogen, for what it's worth, but at no point did anyone ask to see it. Still, my experience doing this was easy, it was reasonably safe, and as far as I can tell, it did not require me to break a single law. Then, just for kicks, I took it a step further and bought testosterone online, a much more heavily regulated substance. Not only was this also essentially legal where I live, it was easier than buying the estrogen. Do-it-yourself hormone therapy, or DIY HRT, is the act of using gender-affirming hormones without a prescription and usually without a doctor guiding you along. DIYing, as we call it, is pretty common in the trans community, and people do it for loads of reasons. Personally, I'm trying it out because I want to change my regimen, but my doctor, ghosted me last year. Not sure what's up with that. The past couple months have seen a ton of discussion around DIYing, spurred on by the re-election of Donald Trump. Trump campaigned on the promise that federal agencies would stop enabling gender transitions at any age. His party hopes to do that by stripping all federal funding from hospitals and clinics that provide this kind of care, which would force them to either stop treating trans people or shut down altogether. What are the odds this actually happens? Unclear. But many people in the States are afraid they won't be able to get a hormone prescription soon, and that underground DIY hormones will be left as their only option. Considering this slightly bleak state of affairs, not to mention that for millions of people DIYing already is the only option, I think we need to get on the same page about what this process actually looks like. Because it's not widely understood, even within the trans community. There's a real culture of secrecy around this stuff, somewhat understandably. I mean, no one wants to attract the wrong kind of attention and trigger a crackdown. I expect some people in the community won't be happy that I'm making this video at all. I've wrestled with it for a long time. But frankly, I think I need to. There's so much fear-mongering around this topic already, and it will get worse as hormone access is made harder. Personally, I expect this to be the next frontier of the anti-trans movement, and they're already gearing up to start lying to the public about what DIYing is. One article I read described what I did, buying legal and tested hormones online, as no less dangerous than buying heroin. This kind of messaging scares people, it leaves them less informed, and it might keep them from getting healthcare that they really need. Now, I'm not here to advocate for taking unprescribed hormones, nor am I trying to paint an overly rosy picture of what that looks like. I just care about bodily autonomy, and I want people to have the information they need to make healthy choices. In this conversation, there are some really basic questions we can ask that'll get us a long way. Why do people choose to DIY hormones? Where do they get the medication? How safe is it? How legal is it? I don't think any of this should be controversial. To make this video a little bit more useful as a resource, I'm going to do something I don't usually do and start us off with a table of contents. Unfortunately, this video is devoid of a shocking third act, it's actually about God type twist. What you see is what you get. In part 1, I'll go over the history of DIY hormone therapy, explain how it emerged and why people choose to do it, including sometimes when they have other options. In part 2, I'll talk about the ways that people access these hormones, and I'll assess the legality and risks of doing so. This will not be an exhaustive guide. As you can imagine, it varies greatly depending where you live. In part 3, we'll look at the health risks that can come from DIYing, because of course they do exist, but we'll also see how the community has stepped up to deal with and minimize these risks in a really impressive way. In part 4, I'll go over the individual medications that people often DIY, including estrogen, T blockers, testosterone, and a few others. I'll explain the different formulations they're found in, the legality and convenience of each one, and a few side effects and risks to watch out for. Only after this, once we're all working from the same basic facts, are we ready to get into part 5, ethics and strategy. What kind of a position should DIYing hold in the trans community and in the global health system? Is it a utopian practice of mutual aid, a flawed but pragmatic response to gatekeeping, or something to be avoided altogether? Security is a real concern in this conversation, so I'm treading pretty lightly here. Comments will either be off or manual approval only. All the information in this video comes either from conversations with people I trust or from resources that are publicly available and take like literally seconds to find. I won't be naming any websites where you can go buy hormones because that would cause a hilarious amount of problems. As we get into this, keep in mind that I am not endorsing DIY for you specifically, and I'm definitely not here to give anyone medical advice. My goal is to help keep people safe and hopefully reduce some stigma along the way. If you think you might want to DIY, I urge you to fact check everything I tell you, especially the stuff about legality, which is liable to change if new suppliers come online or new policies come into force. Speaking of which, this video might become illegal for YouTube and Nebula to host. If the Heritage Foundation has its way, this video could be designated pornography in the United States solely for being about trans people and be outlawed on that basis. So by all means, rip a copy of this video and keep it on your hard drive. You'd be doing me a favor. With all that out of the way, people have been wanting to change their body sex for thousands of years, but for most of history that was pretty difficult because we didn't know what hormones were. We learned that stuff like shockingly recently. Any hormonal transition before that looked like trying something out, seeing if it worked, and even if it did, not really knowing why. Stories of Scythian priestesses who feminized themselves with horse urine have gained an almost mythic status in some circles, but truthfully, we don't know exactly what they did or how common it was, because stuff like this doesn't leave much of a physical trace. We know transition surgeries have been going on since at least ancient Rome, and natural remedies might date back well before that, but the modern history of this stuff starts in the 1940s when the first hormone therapies came on the market. These were conceived basically as treatments for aging, ways for people, especially women, to stay vital and vibrant in those twilight years of their early 50s. We used to be so weird about aging, man. Thank God we figured that out. So some trans people definitely got their hands on these meds, but it was tricky. You could only do it if you found a sympathetic doctor who was willing to essentially experiment on you, or if some pill bottles fell off the back of a truck. In the late 1950s, the Western medical establishment introduced a condition they called transsexuality and started coming up with standards for how to treat the afflicted. Recognition. At long last, this meant that trans people everywhere could finally keep hoping some pill bottles fell off the back of a truck. Because these standards weren't actually introduced to help people transition, they were introduced to limit who was allowed to. As Jules Gill-Peterson put it, the diagnosis of transsexuality came with a particularly cruel twist. It was explicitly designed to restrict access to transition. By establishing extremely narrow diagnostic criteria, doctors were able to reject the vast majority of potential patients from their clinics. Either they did not perfectly pass as generic women or men, they were not heterosexual enough, they did not dress in a conservative fashion, or they weren't white, didn't have blue or white-collar jobs, and were therefore broadly undeserving. It feels important to note a lot of health systems still work this way. Untrusting of patients, eager to put up barriers. If they've eased up on that 50s style paternalism, it's only because they've found a more modern solution, discriminating against people by keeping the resources they need so underfunded that they're basically unusable. We do it to libraries, we do it to public transit, and we sure as hell do it to healthcare, most infamously in the UK, where waiting lists at gender clinics can be well over 5 years long. We should be honest about what that is. It's not a system designed to provide healthcare, it's a system designed to prevent it. It's conditions like these, most often, that DIY hormone therapy emerges under. There are studies coming out of the UK, the US, Brazil, and Vietnam that ask trans people why they went the DIY route, and you see the same answers popping up everywhere. Generally, people couldn't find a doctor who was knowledgeable, couldn't find a doctor at all, or didn't want to wait years to be treated. A few other reasons also come up a lot. Doctor's appointments can be expensive, pharmacies can be out of stock for months at a time, many doctors will only prescribe like super low doses, and something that's often lost when people say we need to be like adding safeguards, by which they mean barriers, Spending years of your life jumping through administrative hoops, proving yourself to a never-ending sequence of professionals can be deeply alienating, and if you can avoid it, you might want to. While trans people have come a long way in terms of visibility, conditions like these still exist to some extent in every country on Earth. As a result, DIY hormone therapy is common literally everywhere. In most places, it's the default way to take hormones. In many, it's the only option available. Even in places you'd expect to have pretty good trans healthcare, say San Francisco, as many as half of us end up DIYing at some point in our lives. That's a big deal. Like, DIYing is often talked about like a really seedy underground thing, but if you look at the numbers, it's normal. Like, arguably more normal than going to the doctor. I don't know, folks. I think those of us who have access need to check ourselves on this. We need to be more thoughtful in how we talk about DIYing. I guess what I want to get across, like right at the top here, is that DIYing is usually a rational response to a person's situation. It's like the best they can do with the hand they've been dealt. That does also mean that for some of us, it's really not the best move. Like maybe you have health issues that would make it riskier. Maybe it's hard to find where you live. Maybe you have a great doctor. Whether or not to DIY is a complicated decision and not one that should be made from a place of fear. If you're thinking about trying it out, don't just assume it's necessary because things are looking bad where you live. You owe it to yourself to learn as much as you can and really consider all your options. Some people have the impression that DIYing is something you do by yourself in your bedroom with your computer, which definitely happens, but it's only one part of the story. A lot of people still DIY the same ways we did 50 years ago, getting meds from people we know offline. The classic thing here is that people have their doctors prescribe them very high doses of hormones and then only use like a portion and give away the rest. Depending where you live, it's also pretty easy to be prescribed hormones associated with your like assigned sex at birth. So like post-op trans women can get T for energy levels. Trans men can get estrogen gel for vaginal atrophy. Whether or not they actually plan on using it, not an endorsement. Not an endorsement. But yeah, if you're curious about DIY, my number one tip is ask a local friend. And if you don't have a local friend, buddy, you gotta start making them. A lot of areas already have well-established supply chains that you won't find much about online. If none of your friends know, maybe ask around at a queer community center or on a local subreddit or Facebook group. I would go so far as to call this a non-optional step. Facebook group. That's so like older Gen Z of me. Discord. Obviously, I should have said Discord. The info you'll get from locals is just so much more helpful than anything I can tell you. They'll know the legal risks where you live, they'll know where to get blood work done, their hormone supply is more likely to be safe, there's less of a paper trail, lower odds of getting scammed. People are nice. Friendship is beautiful. I had to do my little like log off spiel at the top there, but with that said, there's a good chance you'll still end up wanting to order hormones online, in which case you'll have a few options. I won't go into too much detail about these, but if you do choose to go this route, know that most places don't accept credit cards and be prepared to pay in crypto. Yes, I called crypto useless in my last video. I'm sorry. That was before I tried to buy drugs on the internet. The first kind of supplier is home brewers. These are people working alone or in small teams who like order raw ingredients and then process them into medication. The big advantage of home brewing is that it can be a lot cheaper than mainstream stuff. When I buy estrogen at the pharmacy, it's around $30 a month. My online source was closer to $70. Meanwhile, there are home brewers who've been approaching the $1 a month barrier, or only 75 cents with code LILY at checkout. Joke. That's a joke. Home brewing comes with one big downside. The suppliers will tell you this too. Being an unlicensed drug manufacturer means not being beholden to safety regulations like other manufacturers are. Their spaces might not be sterile, their staff might not be properly certified. These are all things to keep in mind. Second, a lot of people use overseas pharmacies. That's what they call them. Whether they're actually overseas depends where you live. Little geography fact for you. I think I'm having too much fun. These places sell medications for all kinds of issues, which at least appear to come from mainstream manufacturers, Bayer and so on. Now, whether these suppliers are legal obviously depends where they're operating from, but Often they are. The good ones are not covert operations. Some are listed on stock exchanges. With that said, these suppliers are still considered gray market, so I wouldn't be entirely trusting. Counterfeit drugs are definitely a thing that happen online, and we've seen them give people pretty serious health issues. I recommend sticking with websites that are recommended inside DIY circles, and especially ones whose meds have been tested by a trusted third party. Actually, that disclaimer applies for every supplier I talk about, especially this next one, which I don't think I should name out loud. You can probably figure it out. Just ask yourself, is there any other group of people that might want hormones without a prescription? Anyone else who might want to keep their whole thing under wraps? I am not endorsing these suppliers, but they do have a towering infrastructure and some decent safeguards if you know where to look. I will note that some of the products they sell are extremely experimental and incredibly dangerous, so as always, proceed with care. One last thing before we move on. A lot of health supplement stores will sell you pills that seem like they would be hormones. They're not. I am begging you to avoid these. The supplement industry is wildly unregulated and full of bad faith actors. I found these quote-unquote feminizing pills made with wild yam root, which isn't going to do anything. Back in 2023, there was actually a bit of a scandal about this. Someone was selling ashwagandha pills as a supposed natural estrogen alternative. But ashwagandha actually increases testosterone, and the dose was so high that a single pill could have landed you in the hospital. As a general rule, these products deserve less trust than a pressure cooker in a punk house. I hope whoever's behind them wakes up with a mysterious cough tomorrow. May not endorse, but I sure as hell condemn. I have been trying to keep her under control this whole time. And I think we just gotta make peace with the situation. Legal risk is a big concern for a lot of the people who shy away from the idea of DIY, partly because it seems like the kind of thing your government wouldn't want you doing, right? The truth of that is complicated and obviously depends where you live. But I will say that in general, the risk of getting charges laid for DIYing appears to be very low. I'm not saying it's impossible. Please don't take this as legal advice. But personally, I've never heard of it happening. If you want to understand the risks of buying unprescribed hormones where you live, there are a few questions you want to ask yourself. How are the medications classified in your country's drug schedule? Are they illegal to buy or only to sell? How would you get caught, and what would happen if you did? I'll run through a few scenarios here. In Thailand, for example, estrogen isn't tightly regulated, so most trans women buy it over the counter at pharmacies. This is technically the right way, but it's also DIYing. In Cameroon, most trans women do the same thing, but much more on the down low because being trans is criminalized in other ways. So even if the medication isn't illegal, buying it and people understanding why could get you in a lot of trouble. It's a question of finding a supplier you can trust and then sharing with your friends. In many countries, estrogen is prescription only, and in some of them, including Sweden and Canada, buying any medication without a script is theoretically not allowed. But illegal? Not really. I don't know. The laws about this stuff were written to stop people from buying opioids, amphetamines, things like that. No one's getting arrested over things that aren't controlled substances. Governments will tell you as much. Now, you might be wondering about testosterone, which very famously is a controlled substance because it's a popular performance-enhancing drug. And for that reason, groups that sell testosterone on the black market are prosecuted all the time. But in most cases, just possessing it falls into that same gray area, frowned upon but not punished. In some places, not explicitly made illegal. In others, like the US, illegal but not enforced. In China, it's illegal to buy testosterone on the internet, but sourcing it in person is a different story. In summary, I don't know, man. I think it depends. It seems to me like the main risks of buying unprescribed hormones are not legal ones, they're logistic. Products can be out of stock for months at a time, prices can shoot up because of scarcity. If an order passes through customs, it might get seized, which you're unlikely to get in legal trouble over, but you will have to start the process over and lose whatever you paid for. Unfortunately, this is a developing situation, and buying any of these medications could be more criminalized in the future. Also, okay, I can't believe this is necessary, but Don't forget that there can be legal risks from transitioning the supposedly right way, too. I don't want to fearmonger here, but you can end up on lists you don't want to be on. Since testosterone is a controlled substance in the US, these government offices called prescription drug monitoring programs are allowed to find out who it's being prescribed to. In many states, they can access your records without any kind of subpoena or warrant, and then forward that info to law enforcement unprompted. In some, they could even access the diagnosis that resulted in you receiving that prescription, which is not great news if you have a diagnosis like, I don't know, transsexualism. We're still kind of learning how this policy is being used, but if you live in the US, it's worth asking yourself, do you trust your state to use this power responsibly? I don't know that I would. There's cause for concern about the future of trans healthcare in too many places to name. Hell, the present of trans healthcare. Anti-trans efforts are underway in, I would bet, every country this is being viewed in. And if they succeed in making hormones hard to access legitimately, it's not crazy to think they'll turn their attention to DIYers next. You can already see hints that this is happening in the UK as the press catches on that if you can't get hormones from a doctor, you might want to find them somewhere else. This trend worries me. You have to wonder how far they'll manage to take this. If governments want to make it harder to DIY, there's several ways they can go about that. They could censor websites that give information, they could raid home brewing operations, they could set up stings, they could start enforcing laws that are already on the books, they could invest in male screening technology. That's off the top of my head. I'm sure there are loads of other ways. But I also want to reassure us, it's not going to work. Not entirely. Between homebrewers, online pharmacies, prescription sharing, black markets, and so on, the ways that DIYing happens are just way too diverse to effectively target. Let me just name a few of the issues they would run into. First, many online pharmacies operate in countries where everything they do is legal. India, for example, is one of the world's largest pharmaceutical exporters, and their online pharmacies are perfectly above board. They make tens of billions a year as a country on this kind of thing. Why would they shut it down? 2, anabolic steroid vendors, notably already illegal, and it doesn't matter. The industry is worth something like $400 million. The authorities already know about this and would probably love to shut them down for good, but the fact that they never have suggests to me that they're not able to. Third, people will always need hormones. Let's not forget that trans people are a small fraction of the HRT market. I mean, most consumers are older, cis men and women, and as long as they need these meds, they'll remain easy to come by. In particular, postmenopausal women are such a big demographic that you can literally buy estrogen on Amazon. Please don't. Oh my God, none of these are trustworthy. But my point is that making hormones harder to access would actually be deeply unpopular with a huge swath of the population, including a lot of voters. Fourth, and my favorite, we will always have allies, right? There will always be people who are willing to overprescribe their patients or homebrew despite the extensive legal risks, or in the absolute worst case, synthesize hormones from scratch. No government can actually hold a monopoly on health. They can only pretend to. This is not me saying it's gonna be okay. It's possible that access will become harder, riskier, more expensive. The supply could get more toxic. We could lose the best sources. I'm just trying to say don't panic. We're not flying blind here, right? We know what drug criminalization does because we've seen it play out dozens of times. We also know from those experiences that people adapt, suppliers adapt, and prohibition literally always fails. Another big thing you want to think about is health safety, and this is another thing people have misconceptions about. People on the internet will tell you that DIY hormones will give people heart attacks or cause their livers to shut down. It's definitely possible, but it has little to do with it being DIY and a lot to do with it being hormones. Hormone therapy is risky because it's medicine. It affects different people in different ways, and if you have certain health problems, it's going to be riskier. With that said, is the DIY supply more dangerous? Yes, without a doubt. It's not nearly as regulated, so the chance of contaminants is higher, the concentrations are harder to predict, and if you're buying from a sketchy source, there's a chance what they give you is just not what you paid for. But let's not forget that the traditional way of accessing hormones has its risks too. Uninformed doctors will prescribe outdated medications that are rough on the body, or they'll prescribe doses that are high enough to be dangerous or low enough to be useless. I'm not talking edge cases. These things are extremely common. And above all, let's remember that being deprived is not a neutral position, and that not taking hormones you need also comes with a slew of health risks. You'll often hear advocates say that gender-affirming care is suicide prevention, and I think that's very true. I want to take it a step further. It also can prevent things like addiction and eating disorders, the ways people cope in its absence. I want to encourage us to be conscientious with this stuff, but there's no reason to pretend DIYing is like the most dangerous option. Our time would be so much better spent just trying to make it safer for people who want to, which is great because there are a lot of ways to do that. So blood tests are important for anyone taking hormones, but DIYers in particular. Basically, like your body needs some amount of sex hormones in circulation, doesn't really care which. And if it takes something that suppresses one, but the other doesn't get elevated, you're going to be really foggy, low energy. You might develop osteoporosis, which I gotta say, worse than it sounds. Well, okay, holes in your bones sounds pretty bad. It's as bad as it sounds. On the other hand, if your levels are too high, you're wasting money by taking too much medication, and you're increasing your risk of serious complications. If ever something is wrong with like your liver or your kidneys, blood work is going to be how you find out before any serious damage can happen. The easiest way to get a blood test is just like to have your doctor send you in. Keep in mind that DIYing just means taking stuff without a prescription. It doesn't mean you have to hide anything from your doctor. They might even help you like read your test results. But also, I understand that not everyone has a doctor, let alone one they trust with this stuff. And there are definitely ways to get blood work without one. Private clinics, walk-in clinics, some services will let you like mail in a sample. Personally, not big into mailing my blood, to each their own. I have a few pointers for blood work. As I read this, I'm realizing that this is like the video of itemized lists. I hope it's not like weird. Okay. First tip, you want to do a blood test before you start taking anything to get like a sense of like your baseline levels. Second tip, figure out if you need to fast beforehand. Probably you do. Third, no matter what meds you're taking, your levels are going to like peak at some point after you take them and then gradually trail off. So you want to do your test like a certain number of days after your last dose. It depends what medications you're taking. Trusty guide up on screen, link in the description. Fourth, figure out what levels you need to keep an eye on and what ranges you should be aiming for, even if your doctor's helping you. Some of them don't know stuff. If you're taking estrogen, generally you want to test for these things over here. And if you're taking testosterone, you want to test for these things. Wow, let's admire them together. Yeah, I don't know what any of those mean, I'm sorry. Those just come from the Gender Construction Kit website, which is a pretty cool resource out of the UK. I recommend checking out their page on blood testing and also the one by Trans Harm Reduction, who we'll talk about in a sec. When you start hormone therapy, it's good to do blood work every like 3 months to see where you're at. That lets you raise or lower the amount of meds you're taking so you can hit like consistently good levels of everything. And once you're settled in, you can slowly space them out further, like 6 months apart, a year apart. With that said, the reality of things is that many people can't get blood work regularly or at all. I would definitely recommend doing it if you can, even if it's like kind of expensive or inconvenient. But if it's really not an option for you, I guess what I would say is like take the least risky formulations you can and don't give yourself like really huge doses of anything. Next up, I want to offer some injection safety tips. I want to, but I don't know much about this and it seems like a high stakes thing to be wrong about. So I'm going to say the classic things: use a sharps container, don't share needles, don't reuse needles. Estrogen and testosterone can both be injected either subcutaneous or intramuscular. Both are fine, but they're done with different needles in different spots. So you want to make sure you understand the one that you're doing. I found a safe injection guide that seems good, so I'm going to link to that below if you want to know more. Now there's also some stuff to know about like what exactly you're putting into your body. Medications have a surprising amount of like food allergens in them, and if you're not getting them from a pharmacist, that's something you need to keep track of yourself. It's pretty common for pills to have lactose in them or sunflower oil. Injections can have sesame oil. This is especially annoying for DIY because a lot of the big sources just won't list the ingredients on them. Like the vial of tea I bought online, I know there is some kind of oil in there, but I have no idea which one. If I had any food allergies, I would either want to steer clear or follow my gay birthright and get tested, baby. Getting hormones tested is a really good way to lower the health risks around DIYing. Basically, there are labs where you can send a sample to verify that it contains everything you think it does and that it's free of any like dangerous impurities, heavy metals, and the like. The big reason you wouldn't want to do this is that it's pretty expensive, like anywhere between $100 and $600. And as we know, a lot of people DIY because they're not made of money. However, this is where some very exciting projects come in. People around the world have been finding ways to get their hormone meds tested and then posting the results online so everyone can learn from them and be safer. This is mostly being done anonymously, but I do want to shout out the good people at Trans Harm Reduction. They do a lot of cool community things, but the really remarkable one is testing the supply of basically all the big homebrew vendors and then just like putting the results on their website. They post the actual lab reports and then also like a dumbed down summary for those of us who did 1 year of film school. The team asked me to make it clear that they don't like encourage or facilitate DIYing. It really is a harm reduction project. They want people to understand what they're putting in their bodies. And for what it's worth, the general results seem to be pretty good. They've only found a couple samples that had any impurities. If DIY hormone therapy is going to become more like trusted and relied on in the coming years, it'll be thanks to hardcore transparency efforts like these. And really, transparency is something the whole community takes seriously. People warn each other of newly discovered complications that doctors like haven't caught wind of yet. They come up with new experimental therapies, test them on themselves, and then upload their blood work into cloud folders. Some of these people are actively trying to invent new kinds of blood tests. There is genuinely groundbreaking science happening here that could improve hormone therapy for everyone. A lot of the people have advanced degrees, but many more are just like regular citizens who want to help. They're working in an increasingly hostile climate with almost no institutional support or funding because they know that otherwise it simply would not get done. It is so fucking cool. Oh, does the light seem different in here? Feels like my hair has been washed. Anyway, I want to talk about the actual medications people use to self-manage their hormones. There are like a metric ton of them, and the ideal regimen really varies from person to person. If you're not looking to take any of these, or if you feel like you're already very familiar with them, feel free to just skip on over to the next section. Before we go any further, I want to give a couple disclaimers. I won't be giving like an exhaustive list of risks or interactions with other medications, because that's something I expect people to find on their own before making any decisions. I will be talking about side effects, but only in a comparative way, like to say, this option has a downside, this one doesn't have, if that makes sense. On the same note, I'm not going to talk in detail about what each medication does, like enumerate every effect of testosterone, because that stuff is already covered in every other trans resource. Obviously, it's important to know these things. I'll put some links down below. So when you're going through like the traditional medical system, the hormone regimen you follow is basically down to what the doctors in your area are comfortable prescribing. Unfortunately, health systems are pretty slow to adapt to new options for trans people, so a lot of the time that means being given a worse medication out of sheer institutional inertia. Going the DIY route means more freedom to choose, which is great, but the amount of options it opens up is a little bit intimidating. Like I'm about to name like 10 different ways to take estrogen. When in doubt, I think just go with whichever one is popular in your area. It'll probably be easier to find. All right, here we go. Every major HRT medication. I'm going to start off with the feminizing side of things, specifically with anti-androgens. These are medications that block the effects of testosterone in your body, so they're also known as blockers. Now, some doctors will encourage you to take only blockers and nothing else. We're not about that here. It can be fine as a short-term thing to like get your body adjusted, but honestly, you need to boost your estrogen or you're going to be exhausted, you're going to be miserable, and worst of all, you won't grow the, what are girls into now? Oh. Mouse tails? Anyway, Spironolactone is probably the most familiar T blocker for most of my audience. It's the one that's used by default in the US and Canada, which is funny because it's actually being used off label. It's not like all that good at suppressing testosterone, and it will make you pee so much. So much that making you pee is actually what it's for. Spiro is very widespread and it's easy to come by, but side effects are common. Dehydration, low energy, dizziness, nausea, your potassium can get too high. I don't mean to be a hater, it's very popular and the side effects aren't too serious. But I think the main reason Spiro is so well known is that this next one, for whatever reason, isn't approved for use in the United States. Cyproterone, to be fair, has a reputation for being pretty hardcore. I've heard it described as the sex offender chemical castration drug, which is technically accurate, but the thing is, it's like very good at blocking T, and it also has effects similar to progesterone. Cipro is commonly found in pills with 50 milligrams each, which I think is where it got its reputation, because 50 milligrams is unbelievably high. It's so much. The consensus at this point is to take a quarter of one pill a day, which makes it substantially less hardcore and also incidentally very affordable. Personally, I spent a few years on Cipro. I really liked it. But for some people, the side effects are a big deal. It's a little more risky if you have problems with your liver or kidneys. But the big one is it can give you brain tumors. They're benign tumors for what it's worth. They're not cancer, but nonetheless, brain tumors. If you're going to take Cipro, it's especially advisable to get regular blood tests because you want to keep an eye on your prolactin levels. If it's really high, you could have one of the aforementioned thingies. Next up, we got bicalutamide. This one's a little bit different because instead of stopping your body from making testosterone, it stops your body from using it. That's a distinction that generally isn't a big deal, but it means your blood tests are going to look a little bit different. And for sciencey reasons that I will put on screen, I guess, it won't prevent male pattern baldness, which the others do. Other than that, it's said to be the most effective of the three, and it also causes breast growth even without estrogen. Speaking of which, estrogen, my personal favorite. So this is the main feminizing hormone, and it's one of the easier medications to access because it's incredibly popular. This is taken by millions of cis women for all kinds of reasons. It is therefore available in a metric shitload of formulations. Estradiol pills are nice because they're very straightforward to use. They're tiny, you take them after eating, that's that. These have replaced a few less effective estrogen pills like Premarin and phenylestradiol, but they're not perfect either. The main downside with pills compared to other options is that they can put strain on your liver over time. It'll help if you let them dissolve under your tongue instead of swallowing them, but even then, other options are slightly safer. Injections are a lot of people's choice, and they have some clear advantages. They're easier on the system, they can be cheaper than pills, you don't need to think about them every single day. Because this method involves injecting something into your body, it's important to check out the source and make sure you can trust them. A lot of people use injections for monotherapy, which is kind of cool. They generally say you shouldn't start hormones this way for reasons I won't pretend to understand. But basically, the idea with monotherapy is that you get your estrogen levels high enough that your testosterone suppresses itself, and then you don't need to take a blocker. This is cheaper, it's a nice way to avoid some side effects, or so I'm told. I've never tried injections because, frankly, I know what kind of person I am. I would be late every time. Injectable estradiol is found in a few different formulations. You got cypionate, valerate, enanthate, benzoate, and undecylate. Maybe some others, I don't know. The first three are the most popular, but honestly, they're all pretty similar. The big difference between them is that you have to inject some more often than others. Then you've also got estrogen patches. I only have one friend who uses these, but she is beautiful, so that bodes well. Patches are similarly safe and low maintenance. You slap them on and forget about them. As far as downsides go, I know some people say it irritates their skin. Other than that, I really don't know why they're less popular. Although, for these purposes, I will say they can be pretty hard to source by DIY channels. And then finally, you've got estrogen gel, who's kind of the new girl in town. She came on the scene a few years ago. Everyone's been turning their heads. Basically, scientists have patented a few hormone gels that would act as birth control or alleviate menopause symptoms. Obviously, these were not made with us in mind, but at some point we realized they would be pretty easy to just make at home. How these work is you apply a little bit of gel once a day to your skin. The exact spot and amount depends on the manufacturer. Gels are a pretty popular choice for home brewers these days because they are dirt cheap to make and unsurprisingly easier to make safely than something like pills or injections. I will say some of them can irritate the skin like patches do, and again, not made by professionals. If that really bothers you, you could use a mass market estrogen gel, but it's like 100 times more expensive and actually less concentrated, so I'm not sure it's worth it. Okay, on to progesterone, which is kind of a mystery. People tack it onto their regimen for breast growth, but it hasn't been super researched, and it seems like mileage may vary. It might do that, it might boost libido and be good for your heart. My pharmacist insists that I take it to protect my uterus, and look, I'm not gonna tell her. At the most, progesterone is like an optional part of a hormone regimen. If you do take it, you wanna wait until you've already had a year or two of breast development so it doesn't stunt any changes. At least that's what they say on Reddit. From what I could find, progesterone comes in 4 different formulations: injections, skin products, medroxyprogesterone pills, and plain old just progesterone pills. Injections are less a real option and more an interesting possibility at this point. I don't have anything to say about them. The creams and gels don't absorb very well. Medroxy is genuinely pretty bad for you, so I'm going to focus on the regular ones. So this is what I get prescribed. These are the gold standard, and most people do the same thing. They take one of these before bed on an empty stomach. It says they can make you drowsy or dizzy, and I noticed that they can be formulated with like peanut oil or sunflower oil, so good thing to keep in mind. And that's all. Okay, fine, I'll talk about it. Some people take these as a suppository. They say it works better. I don't know, maybe. Maybe. Okay, that's it for the feminizing stuff. The masculinizing section will be hilariously shorter. I expect some people will be mad that I didn't spend more time on this, but there's really not as much to say. Testosterone, the big one, generally the only one a person needs. This is available in a ton of different formulations, but the gold standard is injections, namely testosterone cypionate. You inject it once a week and forget about it. You can dial in your dose really specifically to get your levels right. Good for the boys. Now, T is a very standard and popular medication, but it's also a pretty tightly controlled substance, with a huge presence on the black market. That can make it more expensive than it should be, and it also means that DIY sources are often a little bit sketchy. I would encourage thoroughly vetting anywhere that's selling this and see if their supply has been tested recently. Also, injecting things into your body, not everyone's favorite. Certainly not mine. There are definitely other options out there. The other big one being testosterone gel. T-gel is a totally solid medication with upsides and downsides. The big health concern with injections is that they might increase your risk of heart disease, which, if that is true, gel seems to sidestep the effect. The main downside is that testosterone doesn't absorb that well into the skin, so getting your dosage right can be tricky. It can also be irritating, and if it rubs off onto someone else, that's a whole other thing. It also tends to be harder to source than injections. That's kind of it for masculinizing stuff, but there are 2 other less popular options I want to touch on as a little Christmas present for the boys. This video is late. Dihydrotestosterone is a hormone that's naturally metabolized from testosterone in the body. When you take it on its own, it has some but not all of the same effects as T. Specifically, it causes body hair and bottom growth, but it doesn't deepen the voice, which makes it pretty sought after in some circles. However, it also worsens male pattern baldness, and it's pretty hard to source through DIY channels, at least ones that aren't the ones we shall not name. Danazol is an androgen, the same kind of hormone as testosterone or DHT, but it's much less potent than either of those. For that reason, it's not widely used in trans healthcare. It's actually usually taken for endometriosis, but some people seek it out because it reliably stops periods and can have similar effects as T, but importantly, it's not a controlled substance. However, using danazol to masculinize is very much off-label. It doesn't always work, and some of the potential side effects are pretty serious. With all of these medications, I think it's good to keep in mind that some of the changes are permanent, and others tend to reverse if you stop taking them. So if you're interested in deepening your voice and getting some bottom growth, you might be satisfied stopping T after a year. But if you're taking danazol to stop your period, you're gonna have to do that continuously. This is going to impact, of course, the amount of money you have to spend, but also the level of health and legal risk you're taking on. Finally, I want to touch on a class of medications called puberty blockers. These are given to put a young person's puberty on pause for one of many reasons. For trans youth in particular, it gives them more time to decide whether hormone therapy is right for them, or at least we've gotten used to saying that amid the whole media frenzy insisting that we should shut down all kinds of care. It's sort of been forgotten that puberty blockers are a compromise. Not always, but a lot of the time, they're given when a young person knows they want hormones and are old enough to safely start them, but their parents or the health system where they live has hang-ups about that. Honestly, I really resent this idea that people need to wait until they're adults to start hormones. That is not an opinion backed up by medical science. It's a political position, and it's one that wasn't normal to hold until recently. I was given hormones as a minor, and thank God I was. I was ready. If you read the latest standards of care from WPATH, the leading authority on these things, you'll find them saying they used to start people on hormones at 16, but it might be healthier to let them start sooner so they can avoid the side effects of puberty blockers. Frankly, they're also expensive as hell, so how many teenagers are actually looking to buy them? I don't know. Maybe this is a moot point, but here's what I think. If someone's already been forced out of the health system and denied care, they don't need to compromise with that shitty system anymore. They should make the choice that's best for them. And if that is puberty blockers, well, the option is there. The bottom line is this. Managing your own hormone therapy without a prescription is mostly safe. Thanks to the work of harm reduction groups and citizen scientists, it's almost definitely the safest and most effective it's ever been. Whether it's legal is a little more complicated. Generally, yes, but it depends where a person lives and where they fall in the supply chain, whether they're buying, selling, or producing. There are certainly places where owning hormones without a prescription could get you in trouble, but frankly, even that isn't enough for me to say people shouldn't do it. I'm not going to condemn important healthcare just because it's been unfairly criminalized. I mean, if someone in Texas needs an abortion, am I going to tell them that it's morally wrong to? No. Absolutely not. Healthcare is a right that should be defended and expanded at every opportunity, and that takes precedence over any personal opinion I might have. But if you want to know my personal opinion of DIY, honestly, I don't think it's ideal. It's a lot of work. It's too easy to skip out on best practices. The medications aren't insured, the suppliers are occasionally sketchy, and if they sell you something that makes you sick, you're probably without recourse. I am a big advocate for universal health care. I think a robust health system will always be more comprehensive and easier to access than an underground one. And the fact that a system like that isn't available to most people, cis or trans, is a tragedy, nothing less. So as much as I like to end my videos on a hopeful note, please don't take away from this that it's all going to be okay once we figure this stuff out. The fact that we're even having this conversation means that it's not okay. If a massive switch over to DIY becomes necessary and then a crackdown follows suit, we will lose people along the way. There will be people who don't make the jump because they can't lock down a steady supply, or they can't afford the legal risks, or they just aren't comfortable DIYing. Some of them will die. This shit isn't fun. This shit isn't fun. Yeah. Okay, I hope it's clear that I say all this from a place of love. I just don't think it does us any favors to romanticize the struggle. DIYers who live in countries where they're highly criminalized make it clear that it puts them under a ton of strain. It's not badass. It's not glamorous to run what the law may well interpret as a clandestine drug operation. In a just world, none of this would need to happen. But thinking about trans communities all over the world, if there's one thing we have in common, it's that we find a way to make it work. If this level of adversity feels new to some of us, well, it's not. These are the conditions that we've faced 99% of the time, and they're the conditions that most of our cultural practices emerged under. DIY hormone therapy has allowed our community to survive for the past 90 years. If we didn't have it, we wouldn't have the community we have today, resilient and pragmatic and big enough to keep each other alive. There is no trans community as we know it without DIYing. It may not be perfect as an individual healthcare regimen, but as a survival strategy, it is remarkable. It's incredible. To deny it would be to deny everything. Now that we've got the facts about DIY hormones, I think what we need to do is crystal clear. And luckily, this is something you can do whether you're cis or you're trans, whether you think DIYing is amazing or terrible. You can help make it safer. Pay for someone's blood test. Join a harm reduction org for people who use drugs. Do outreach with them and try to expand their mandate. Consider donating to trans harm reduction. I'll be giving them some of the money from this video because in their case, a little goes a long way. Or like use your expertise. If you're a lawyer, teach people about the legality of DIYing in your area. If you're a biochemist, do some research in your spare time. If you're a doctor, give people health info. If you somehow have access to a mass spectrometer, you can do the testing yourself. There's got to be at least one here, right? Honestly, the amount of opportunity here is refreshing. So often these days, we're up against problems that can't be solved under capitalism, or problems we can only beg the ruling class to deal with, which they never do. This is a case, though, where individual people at all levels of commitment can make a real difference. And I've only named like a few of the ways you can help. My suggestions are limited because I don't want to be seen as endorsing anything dubiously legal. Blanket statement. I don't endorse anything. With two exceptions. You see this painting here? I love it. I love it so much. It's by Nolan Simon. The title is Advent. Don't worry, this is not like an ad for the painting. But I met Nolan last month. We were on a panel together at his exhibition. And as soon as I saw this one on, I guess, like his Instagram, I knew it had to be in this video. I feel like it really captures the balance of like excitement and danger that is at the core of DIYing. I also like that it's kind of giving you incomplete information. I feel like the cutoff is kind of weirdly tight, right? We get so little context about what's happening here. As a child of the DVD bonus features generation, I recently decided to double down on doing something like that for this channel. At least for the foreseeable future, every video I make is getting a bonus video exclusive to Nebula, the streaming service I co-own with a bonkers lineup of the best creators in the game. Since these like main videos are getting longer and further apart, I think it'd be a fun way to like flex my creative muscles, you know? Light, fun, artsy companion pieces. Sometimes that's an interview with an artist whose work I was talking about. Sometimes that's a review of a millionaire's awful children's books. And before we even crack it open, I have some things I need to cover. You see this little award type sticker thing on the front? So that's not real. So I was considering doing a bonus video where I talk more about DIYing and give more like opinions on it, but I realized I don't feel great about paywalling that kind of info. And look, it's early 2025, right? I was thinking maybe we could have fun for like even 2 seconds. So what I wound up doing instead is making a video about Advent, the painting. And Nolan's body of work in general, and his influences, and honestly, the surprisingly many ways that I feel like his body of work connects with whatever I'm trying to do over here. I'm calling this video, The World's Burning, Let's Look at Some Cool Art. I very much enjoyed making it in this week we're having, and I hope you check it out. Nebula is great for this kind of thing. Since we all own the platform together, we have a real stake in it remaining like a nice place to hang out, which means that the videos we make for Nebula don't have to be rage bait, don't have to be like perfectly optimized to fry your attention span. Also, in this particular case, something that's really nice is I can show paintings with nudity in them, which would not fly elsewhere. As a platform, Nebula just makes room for so many different kinds of storytelling, things that aren't possible in an ecosystem built for infinite growth or ad friendliness. Projects that are laid back and personal, like many of Jacob Geller's exclusives, or refreshingly candid about sex, like Broe Deschanel's Taboo on Screen series, or ambitious works of fiction, like Abigail Thorne's short film Dracula's Ex-Girlfriend. This one isn't in the script because it came out literally yesterday, but we have a new weekly video game review series from, in my opinion, one of the greatest to ever do it, Innuendo Studios. I am very excited about this. If you sign up for Nebula using my link, you can get all these projects, my growing backlog of exclusives, and a crazy amount of stuff I do not have time to mention, utterly ad-free and steeply discounted for all the lily heads out there. We will come up with a better name for you in the future. With my discount, it comes to $36 a year, $3 a month. I think it's a very good deal. I hope you check it out. So all the videos that I put out are team efforts, but this one considerably more so. Since I came into this conversation as something of an outsider, I wanted to take the time to learn like how people closer to the issue think about it. I heard from about 20 people across Blue Sky and Twitter about like safety considerations. They were surprisingly respectful of my request to please not yell at me. I also spoke to a few patrons who were generous enough to share their personal experiences DIYing, which I truly appreciate. And now I want to credit some specific people by name, but I forgot to ask them if it would be okay. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to say it, and then if I don't get the okay from them, I will just censor it. So my friends and Vin taught me about the supply of DIY hormones and had some helpful thoughts on how to talk about it safely. Selena, who I actually met at the panel with Nolan, is an archaeologist, I believe, and she had some very interesting stuff to share about like trans people in the historical record. Not much of it made it in, but I'm hoping to talk about it more at some point in the future. The one and only Florence Ashley, who was kind enough to answer my questions about like the legal side of things and the crackdowns that might be coming up. Abigail Thorne offered me her thoughts on where things are at in the UK, which was very helpful. Not an advisory thing, but Sasha Boudreau printed this for me because I was at home with COVID. On top of that, all of these people helped me work through the tricky ethical questions about how to make this video responsibly, as did my friends Esther and Sadie. The video would not have been arguably anything without their help. At least it would not have been what it is today. So I truly appreciate their guidance. But I'm still feeling complicated about this whole thing. I have weighed the risks thoroughly, and I feel like the video that I made is worth the risk of visibility. But yeah, I'm still thinking about it. I mean, I think how public trans people should be right now, how much we should like put our info in like the public sphere like that, it's something on a lot of people's minds, and there are clearly very strong opinions on both sides. If you do feel like I took it too far in this video, I apologize. This is something that I think we all need to sort of renegotiate in the coming months. I want to remind folks that I'm open to feedback on this. There is the Google form in the description. Please send me something, especially if I got something like concretely, objectively wrong. I would like to remedy that. You know, I did still really enjoy working on this video. It's just great to like take a step back and be able to do like a ton of research like this, which is possible in very large part thanks to my Patreon supporters. Patrons get name in the credits, they get early access to my videos, and right now I have a few spots available for the like content consultant tier if you would like help with your video scripts or thumbnails or just like general career advice about writing or YouTubing. I'm happy to do that. Thank you to the helpers. Thank you to the patrons. I will see you in 2 to 9 months. Pregnancy style. Girl, what are you talking about?